20 years ago, my guest Jack Baxter arrived at a popular club on the Tel Aviv beach called Mike's Place. The purpose of his visit was to run down a piece for a movie in the works on terrorism. The Second Intifada, that time of unbridled terror in the streets of Israel, typified by the bombings of buses and public buildings, was going strong. That evening, the reporter became the story when a terrorist triggered his bomb. Baxter, who was seriously wounded, was filmed fighting for his life, footage that became an award-winning documentary called Blues by the Beach. It was followed by another film, The Last Sermon. Jack Baxter, thank you so much for joining me here at the Media Line. Jack Baxter, is it possible that 20 years has passed since the bombing at Mike's Place?
Well, most definitely. Now it's 20 years. It'll be the exact date is April 30th, 2003. Next morning, on the 30th of April, 2003, was the presentation of the U.S. Roadmap for Peace plan with the quartet, Russia and the Arab League, the European Union. And that night, two British nationals came into Mike's Place. These guys were not Palestinians. This was an international terrorism incident right next door to the American embassy, which Mike's Place was.
I assume that your life changed more than walking with a carrying stick. What else happened?
Well, I had both my eardrums were blown out, size of Tic Tacs, holes in my eardrums. I actually had the first operation done in the United States after I got back to repair those holes in my eardrums, because the doctor said the reason why it's never been done before is anybody that has holes in his eardrums like that is dead. So that happened. I'm partially paralyzed right down the middle. So on my left side is, the feeling of pins and needles, if you can imagine that. My right side, I'm fine. So that's other injuries, but those are the lingering effects.
Your experience apparently didn't stop you from coming back to this region, to Israel and the Middle East. Is there something you're looking for?
Well, I originally came in 2002 to, after 9/11, because I had heard and I watched. I mean, I had no idea. I'd never been to Israel before, but I saw terrorism experts explaining that, or trying to explain that a big reason for the terrorist attack on 9/11 in New York and in the United States was because of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians, and that somehow triggered the international terrorism against the United States. So that was my original motivation, was to find out what that was really all about. Not that I could solve um, the Middle East conflict, but I thought that I could make it make sense to me, and through that process make it make sense to other Americans.
I asked this question because you sort of have relived the incidents of your life over and over through two films and a graphic novel. What happened? How did that evolve?
Well, the graphic novel came about because Joshua Fowden and I, who was my director on Blues by the Beach, the film that we did, or that what we were doing while um, the bombing took place. About 12 years later, we came up with an idea to make a movie, not a fictional movie, but a feature film based on this. So we started writing a screenplay. We finished that screenplay after about a year, went to Hollywood with it, gave it to various agents and everybody else. Of course, it went nowhere, and people promised us the moon. Uh, I I ran into a friend of Joshua's who is a publisher of a graphic novel company called First Second Books in New York, and they're an imprint of Macmillan, which is one of the biggest publishers in the world. He liked the screenplay, and he said this would make a perfect graphic novel. So that's how that started. And 3 years later, the graphic novel came out. Beyond that, in 2017, came up with an idea, Joshua and I, to actually speak with and interview the two British suicide bombers, their families. Of course, both of them are deceased. So we went to England. First, we started out here with the media line, had a town hall press conference for us at Mount Zion Hotel. Muslims, Palestinians, Arabs, Orthodox, Jews, you name it, were at that town hall seeing us off. And we went to refugee camps all throughout Europe. And eventually we wound up in England. And that's what that story is about.
Jack, we had met prior. Blues by the Beach came out. The Media Line was running a press club, the Mideast Press Club, and we presented the movie to Israelis and Palestinians and foreign press. Interestingly enough, cut to today, and I'm not sure that we could actually show that movie today with Israeli-Palestinian press coming together because of the environment. So how do you look at the changes in history and what's happened over the last decade?
During the second Intifada in 2003, which this was in the height of, there was palpable tension on the street, and people were looking both ways when people didn't want to be in crowds on the street. And I remember that. And the thing about Mike's place was that here you had a place next door to the American Embassy on the Tel Aviv beachfront, where not only Israelis were hanging out, but expats, a lot of Brits, Americans, Arabs. Because it was next door to the American Embassy, there were U.S. Marines who were guards over there that were in there. So it was a real coming together place and the one rule that was told to me about the place by one of the co-owners, Gal Gonsman, the rule at Mike's place is no politics and no religion, having none of that on the bar. So when these two guys came in on April 30th, that's exactly what rule they were first breaking, besides the fact breaking a couple of commandments. Thou shalt not kill. But they were bringing their religion and politics into the bar. And it'd still be persona non grata if you do that at Mike's place in Tel Aviv, the Mike's place here in Jerusalem, or the Mike's place that they operate in the beautiful resort of Eilat.
What's going to put an end to the 20-year quest that you've had and finding closure to that attack, that very horrific day?
We're having a screening of Blues by the Beach at the Tel Aviv Cinematheque, and the memorial service that they have every year at Mike's place. I can tell you that 20 years, I'm looking for this to be wrapped up for me right now. I figure 20 years of dealing with with this subject matter, it's time to move on for me. Not that I left it any different probably, but we told a true story. We captured a real event that happened. For some reason, we were there at the first suicide bombing by a foreign national on Israeli soil when these two Brits who were linked to an Al Qaeda cell that later blew up the London transit system a couple of years later and were linked back to Mike's place. So I don't know if there's if there is closure, but I'm sure going to try to get some closure, and that's why I'm here. And it's been wonderful to be in this position and to actually go back to Mike's place and be with all of our friends and the Mike's Place family.
The larger picture is a little bit bittersweet. Some Israeli filmmakers have been able to place their films on the international streaming circuit. Politics have been playing a role lately, and it's been more difficult to not necessarily get out the information you're trying to get out, documentaries on the attack, on what happened to you that very day here in Tel Aviv. Why is that, Jack? What do you think is happening in Hollywood?
Well, I can tell you that in 2018, I was at the Cannes Film Festival where we showed a version of Blues by the Beach, which was showing in screening in Tel Aviv, and we got picked up for this graphic novel for a major motion picture in Hollywood. Antoine Fuqua was involved. Todd Komanicki, who wrote the Clint Eastwood movie Sully, and also Andrew Levitas, who is the director and producer of a terrific film called Minimata, starring Johnny Depp, which kind of got lost in the whole COVID situation that happened. I can tell you in Hollywood, from everything that I've heard, because we've had a struggle for 4 years now, a lot of money has been spent, in my estimation. We're talking, over $100,000 on a script. These are major players: Antoine Fuqua, Todd Komanicki, Andrew Levitas, and the reaction that they've gotten from Hollywood and other people that I know that are associated, and I think I can say this very truthfully. One of the worst things that you can be referred to or thought of or accused of in Hollywood these days is the Z word. Now, what's the Z word? Zionist. So if you show that maybe you have, something positive to say about Israel, but in this case, we're not dealing with politics and religion. We're dealing with a human story. Terrorism is there. Yeah, religion is on the outskirts. Politics is involved. But Israeli stories, I guess, from everything that I've been told and the reaction to our project, which has picked up steam. It's been written about in Variety and Hollywood Reporter. Our option hasn't been picked up. That just went by the wayside a couple of months ago. So hopefully it'll get picked back up. But if you're trying to do something about Israel, I would think the best thing that you can do at this point, and what we're looking to do, quite frankly, if nothing happens out of Hollywood, I guess the best thing to do is to do something in Israel, a la Fauda, and some of the great stuff that's coming out of here, because that way you don't have to uh, try to be politically correct, which is the big problem in Hollywood. How do they slice the baby here? How do they, show that Palestinians and Israelis are both nice people, and how do you do that? Well, the name of this book is Mike's Place, a true story of love, blues, and terror in Tel Aviv. True is the operative word here.
Do you feel that Hollywood is slamming the doors on these kinds of films?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not talking about a documentary now. We're talking about a feature film with, you've heard the lineup I just gave you: Antoine Fuqua, Todd Komanicki, Andrew Levitas. These are guys signed to Creative Artists Agency in Hollywood. This is not small potatoes here. This isn't an independent, a couple of guys running around with a high eight trying to figure something out. These are $100,000 been spent on a script, and we can't get off the schneid. So I think that it's definitely a problem. It's definitely a perception, and maybe the only way around it, instead of being, you know, getting kicked around in Hollywood and shunted, and sorry, I don't want to, we can't take the chance, or we don't want to look like we got our thumb on the scale for Israel. We definitely don't want to be accused of being the Z word, Zionists. So maybe, we'll accept it like Fauda if it comes from Israelis. But this isn't just Israelis. I'm an American. So, I'm just going to keep positive, and I'm going to believe that all things work together for good.
Israel's 75th anniversary. It coincides with the 20th anniversary of Mike's Place. So as an American who has been to Israel many times, was wounded seriously in Israel, has spent his life looking for answers, how do you feel today?
I'm very happy that I've actually had the experience of getting to know this part of the world, and not just Israelis, but Palestinians and Arabs. I've been to Dubai through this process, through the same, through the book, and we won an award for the last sermon in Tunis back in 2020. That's remarkable that we could screen a film about an Israeli suicide bombing outside of the American embassy and the related films, and screen them before Arab audiences and Orthodox audiences and people that don't even know anything about Israel. So I'm really glad and more overjoyed that I've gotten to know Israelis, and that I consider Israel, and I consider Mike's Place in particular family. And that's where I'm at.
Jack, what is it like to watch a Mideast thriller, an action film, after you've been there, done that, been in a real life coma?
Well, Mideast thrillers, I mean, now they've become part of my DNA watching them. So I'm into it because, I'm still carrying around, what's called organic shrapnel, embedded organic shrapnel, which is part of the suicide bomber's body. So, I'm part of this whole thing, and I'm hoping that 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 peace comes here and all of that. In the meantime, people have to live, and like I said, Israel is a family. I know in East Jerusalem and in the territories, Palestinians are family, and those are the kind of stories I want to see done. That there's a resolution and there's hope for the future, even if that's not always the case.
Jack, thank you so much for sharing. As we are entering the 20th anniversary of Mike's Place, I wish you peace of heart and mind, and that your story gets told.
Thank you for having me here at the Media Line. I really appreciate it, Felice.